I don't understand the question.
We have, just to, in fact, he had his hand up before, and just the last question and comment, I think, before is Ali Reza, please. You can comment. He's also an Islamic scholar.
Just some comments about the first question, malpractice as well as medical negligence. There are appropriate measures to tackle with those problems. In the university level as well as the organization which Professor Qadiani is working there, if it's related to medical negligence, there is a committee to deal with the issue. But if there is any unmoral practice by physicians, it may be dealt at the level of the university or hospitals. Of course, they distinguishes these two categories differently and they deal with them differently. Regarding your question, there is no attempt to convert people from their religion, because if they believe their own religion as we believe on, we don't like to somebody try to convert us to another religion, and we do know how they feel if we wanted to try to do so, and it's not ethically right to do so. But if there is a Christian, for example, Christian a doctor working at the area which usually is populated by Christians, the patients will go to that physicians for therapeutic purposes. And if not, if they go to a Muslim physician, they would inform physician that they are Christian, and if there is any religious limitation or somehow, they will inform the doctor, and doctor would know how to deal with. And the last question, I'm a medical doctor, and I faced the situation which you raised. Any situation with maybe morally, I would like to say morally tolerable, not acceptable, tolerable to, I'm not saying deceive again. I don't like to use this word, but we distinguish between holding the truth and telling lie. If family asks doctor to do not disclose the patient's diagnosis, then the doctor will in somehow follow family's wishes, and it's the responsibility for the family to inform the patient about the diagnosis. Then I would say usually they don't lie. They may hold the truth, and it has to be disclosed through the special channel, let me say, which is the family. Thank you.
I'd like everyone who came into the room since this morning who did not mention their name and country to mention that on a microphone, so that when you go to lunch you will know each other. So we'll start, I think, put up your hand or get close to a microphone if you didn't say already. So anyone who was did not mention their name already, please stand up and say your name. Use a microphone would be better.
In Thailand, I'm English originally, and have studied a lot of traditional medicines. I'm very interested in the topic of ethics. Thank you.
India.
Thailand.
Let me give a couple of instructions that might be useful for you at lunchtime. Firstly, I'm going to take my computer with me, although we'll be leaving some of the projection computers here, but it's up to you. The cafeteria is, well, the buffet restaurant, I should say, is in the first floor, and for those of you staying in the hotels here, it's where you ate breakfast. But you just go down the stairs and away from the road, you walk in the hotel. Inside the hotel, you go towards the buffet restaurant. We start again in 55 minutes, and I'd like to just, we now have a box out there to drop off your consent forms. We're taking consent for those who, for video and audio recording. And I'm not sure what we're going to do if you don't consent, but we'll probably erase your face from the videos. And we're also going to have a box for name cards, for keeping all your name cards. And those who have not yet given the presentation file, please give it to Naoko, who's on the computer here. And okay, so please enjoy your lunch, and just wear your name tag. Everyone attending the conference has a free lunch. Okay, so please just join in the lunch here. Thank you. Education in schools across Asia and the Pacific. And the first paper is, in fact, a more general paper, Dr. Nessi from India, on Indian ethics and contemporary bioethical issues.
Good afternoon, all of you. I'm Dr. Nessi, teaching philosophy in University of Kerala, India. So I'm going to present something different. The topic is Indian ethics and contemporary bioethical issues. Now, my purpose here is just bring to your mind the point that Indian tradition has got a strong foundation of ethics. I say this because it's a general conception that in India, or Indian philosophy is concerned with metaphysics, epistemology, or things related to the other world. Questions relating to ethics and social life is not a matter of concern for the Indian tradition or Indian philosophy. That is the often raised complaint and criticism against Indian tradition. I am now here pointing the fact that this is not the case. In the Indian philosophical traditions, we have strong foundations of ethical principles that govern our social life, day-to-day life. And I go to the extent of saying that even in the contemporary ethical debates of contemporary issues of ethical debate, Indian ethical principles can contribute much to that. So that is the sum and substance of my paper. I just summarize what I have to say. So there are two fundamental problems in all thought. First is the polarity of life and world affirmation and life and world negation. Second was the relationship between ethics and these two approaches of life. In the life and world affirmation, human beings see the world as having a value per se, and something that human beings are expected to preserve and advance. In the life and world negation, the world is something meaningless and sorrowful. Rather than seeking to perfect the imperfectible, human beings should renounce attachment to the world and seek to perfect their inner beings. The greatest problem for world and life negation is that it makes no room for an active ethics. It reverts more to the inner virtues than to outer activity. It asks of human beings more a spirit of kindliness, free from hatred, than a life of active love. Indian approach is characterized as this kind. So this is the usual comment about the Indian tradition. Now this point has been reinforced by certain other factors. I will narrate. One, the nature of concrete moral duties defined with reference to the social organization on that locality. For example, what conduct is ethically right in the city-states of Greece was not necessarily so in the imperial Rome. Hence, in the Indian context, moral actions call for a different connotation. Second, classification of duties and virtues is naturally influenced by the social realities, and anyone who is not familiar with that kind of social life is likely to have no intimate knowledge and appreciation of its ethical codes. Now in the Indian context again we find human life itself, the life of the very same individual is divided into different stages, namely ashramas, and the duties pertaining to different stages naturally vary from one another. For example, the stages of brahmacharya, student life, grihastha, the householder, vanaprastha, the forest dweller, and sannyasa, the saint, call for different duties and different stages even in the life of the very same individual. Then another important point to remember is a scriptural basis of ethical principles in the Indian tradition. Now I will bring to your attention another very important point, the much adored distinction between shreyas, namely perfection, and preyas, pleasure. With an inclination towards shreyas is a peculiarity of Indian ethics. The ascetic preachers preached that highest spirituality was synonymous with renunciation of the world. They go to the extent of prescribing a milder discipline for the householder who are taken to be men of the world and who had obligations of different levels to fulfill rather than contemplation and spiritual practice. One more point, the doctrine of dharma is very basic to the Indian tradition. So there are different karmas prescribed along with this. Nitya karmas or duties of perfect obligation, kamya karmas or duties of imperfect or contingent obligation, and naimitya karmas or contingent and obligatory duties. Now along with it, the negative mark on Indian ethics has been reinforced by another concept called the concept of karma. The doctrine of karma says that actions or attitudes are the results of previous actions or previous births. Therefore, there is complete negation of human freedom, which is the very basis of ethical life. Now, you may have heard the name of Shankaracharya, the 9th century advocate of Advaita Vedanta tradition in India. According to him, ultimate reality was one, and therefore he relegated ethics to a lower level because it involves distinctions. For him, the ultimate goal was liberation, namely moksha, meaning the end of cycles of rebirth and the realization of the ultimate unity without any distinction. The place of ethics in this scheme is only preparatory to the path of realization and has nothing special to offer to effect realization. Further, it is categorically made clear that the liberated man is beyond the distinction of any ethical principles. Now, with all these beliefs, it is held that ethics has no place in the Indian tradition. But I want to remind you one fact, that when it is said that moral obligation rested upon recognition of specific duties attached to each caste and stage of life, it is not correct to say that there were no universal duties which every man is expected to perform. For instance, there are certain duties which cut across sectional differences of society. Duties relating to transcendental matters, the abjuration of the 6 deadly sins like lust, anger, greed, infatuation, pride, and jealousy. Now, these are considered to be a human obligation without distinction of any creed or section or any differences. The renunciation of excessive attachment and hatred of all kinds is enjoined as a universal duty in the Indian tradition. Now, the science of salvation, Moksha Shastra, is central to the Indian tradition. That's a general belief. Along with it, there is the science of statecraft, Artha Shastra, for dealing with international relations and the 4 objectives of human life, the Chatur Vargas or Purusharthas. Actually, there is something called Indian philosophy of values. From the standpoint of Indian philosophy, there are 2 functions of knowledge. One is theoretical, namely revealing the existence of some object, Artha Parichiti. And second is the practical, namely affording help in the attainment of some purpose in life, Phala Prapti. They are referred to as fact and value, respectively. It is held that knowledge of facts lead to the pursuit of values. Hence, the meaning of the value in the Indian tradition is an object of desire or that which is desired. The well-known group of 4 values, namely Artha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, and Moksha, are called purusharthas or human values because they represent the ends that are consciously perceived by human beings, which are not perceived consciously by any other beings. Now, along with it, we find that there are three elements which are very important in the following of ethical principles in the Indian tradition. One is the distinction between purity and impurity, shuddha and ashuddha. Second is renunciation and societal life. See, on the one hand, Indian tradition advocates renunciation of social life. On the other hand, we find the emphasis on social. The householder is expected to lead a social life, a meaningful social life. Now, the third point I want to emphasize is the principle of ahimsa. For Gandhi, in the modern times, it was the foundation of all human progress. Nonviolent resistance requires strength and resolve. See, it is not only Gandhi in the modern times, but this concept of ahimsa is there, well grained in the Indian tradition. Right from the ancient times, the Jainis, the Buddhists, all are advocating the principle of ahimsa. Now, with all this, we find that we are in a position to say that ethical principles are very basic to the Indian tradition. Now I come to the contemporary situation where is there any relevance for these ethical principles in the contemporary situation? I will give you only three examples. One, human rights and women. The place of women in social life has been much discussed topic from the Vedic times onwards. There is a historical development regarding the status of women. Further, it has been analyzed historically and studied historically from the very ancient times onwards. And it has also been recognized in the Constitution of India. Many acts are passed based on the ethical principle that women ought to be treated as men or men are treated, and justice is blind to gender. So this is the basic principle of our Constitution. But the enforcement of these acts and laws stand on the way of removing the disparity. So that is on the practical side. Second is about suicide. Ancient law books consider suicide as a major violation of moral law. So this is our traditional concept. Even then, religious suicide like sati is being supported. You might have heard of the concept of sati in the Indian tradition. Actually, the debate over sati embodies the encounter of traditions and modernity. On the one side, there are those who hold to the traditional values and place of women in society and family, those who advocate sati. Now, those who oppose it, they say there are those who champion the cause of women and seek to elevate them to equal standing with women. Traditional texts are biased on the principle of inequality. Modern human rights perspective is based on the presumption of equality. So there is a contradiction in that principle. The third point I want to show you is the concept of abortion. The earliest Hindu texts view that abortion is a serious crime, and one who extracts the embryo from the womb is an evildoer. This is based on the following three conceptions. One, Hindu view is that human being is a combination of spirit and matter. The fetus in the womb is held to possess consciousness and even memory of the past lives. Second is, the axioms of the doctrine of karma and rebirth is against abortion, since such an action terminates the possibility of the unborn's opportunity to develop and realize a possibility of life. Third is the importance of sons who are necessary to continue the family line and to perform the religious ceremonies at the death of the father. But the Hindu tradition always accorded personal moral status to the embryo or fetus throughout conception. But now, in the modern context, we find abortion is made legal in the Indian context. But what we are objecting and debating to is the debate over selective abortion, though through sex determination tests. Now again, two powerful opinions are there to be debated. Now, in conclusion, what I say is that in the Indian tradition, ethics has a long history, of course. It has tended to concentrate on attitudes and personal cultivation leading to liberation. But resources that can be used to address modern issues as well very well present in its fold. These resources can be used to discuss issues relating to euthanasia and environment, equality and even medical technology. Though in the formative stage at the present, one can look into the Hindu tradition for meaningful insights into the still wider range of pressing modern issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have a question? Yes, Subrata. And I should, while he's getting to the microphone, if you remember in the morning, there were a number of disappointed persons who couldn't ask a question because they were too slow to put their hand up. So if you want to ask a question, you must ask immediately, otherwise you have to be overlooked, okay, and wait till next time. Thank you.
The question is that you have equated India with Hinduism. I mean, I appreciate the spirit behind it, but some people may not be very comfortable with the idea of equating India with Hinduism, because there are more than 200 million Muslims, and the Christians and the Buddhists are also there. So how would you address that issue?
May I answer? Thank you for making the comment, but my intention is not of that, just bringing out the ethical perspective only. Being a Christian, I'm not used to that distinction between Indian and Hindu.
During lunchtime, somebody brought up the issue about the kind of questions that one's supposed to ask. And it was mentioned that there are some questions that should not be asked. But anyway, to make a meeting of any usefulness, and to avoid it becoming, forgive me for the language, becoming an emotional masturbation, we have to interact honestly with what we believe, what we think. But one thing that we've been hearing now, the importance of religion in ethics. And this last speaker was talking about in Hinduism, human is a combination of spirit and matter. And I believe that this is also the case in Islam and Christianity. And one thing that I'd like to bring our attention to, because UNESCO is very much into the education field, is this idea of evolution that is being taught in schools. And can UNESCO play an important role to get this issue addressed head-on? Because I believe it's only a few people worldwide, relatively speaking, who believe in this issue that is having a great negative impact on the thinking of people. Because deep inside they know that human is a combination of spirit and matter, but when they go to school they are taught this theory that we and slime, we come from the same ancestors, and that we just occur here by chance. Anyway, I will stop here and get some comments from the chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any comment on that?
No, it's to UNESCO.
Yeah, I know. So, thank you. Briefly, I think if you looked on all the UNESCO homepages, and I have not done it, to search for the word evolution, you'd find probably, as you say, I guess a Western scientific viewpoint on evolution that's consistent with the natural science. As a Christian myself, it's often was discussed, the questions of evolution, theistic evolution, the conflict metaphor that Colin Russell wrote about in a famous book nearly 20 years ago, on how the conflict, apparent conflict between evolutionary theory and Darwinism and Christianity was constructed as a way to move the power from the former priests of religion to the new priests of science. And if you look at some of the history of England and Europe in the 19th century. And if you've ever been to the Natural History Museum in London, for example, it was built as a cathedral to the creations of science, to try and move the priesthood from theology to science. And so there's some interesting books on this. I personally have found no conflicts in the teaching of biological evolution, and there should also be teaching of moral values and spiritual values, and I don't find any conflict. I think that will also probably be a general perception of UNESCO's teaching, but I am not well enough informed of the teaching of evolution in UNESCO circles to answer. I think we have to move on, and thank you very much, Dr. Nessie, for that. We're going to, as I said, so thank you. We're going to have to move through the papers. We have a dozen more papers to go on this afternoon, and I will try to give people the same amount of time, and if you talk a bit longer, you have less time for questions. Thank you. So the next speaker, Lindsay Connor from my hometown, Christchurch, New Zealand, and we'll talk on bioethics education.
Well, kia ora tātou, that means hello everybody, hi, welcome. I've been working in the field of bioethics education, I guess, for the last 12 years or so, firstly as a teacher in a secondary school, and now I'm a teacher-educator of science teachers, and I've had the privilege of working with other teacher educators as well. So I'm talking from the perspective today of the evolving, if you like, the evolving way in which we're examining and looking at the education side of bioethics in New Zealand. So I'm going to pick up on some of the ideas that previous speakers have talked about already today, particularly the idea around the relational theory of personalisation that Peggy spoke about this morning, yes. And if you can't actually see on there, but there are two hands connected on this slide. That's a bit vague, never mind. But the idea there is that in this view that I have of teaching and learning in bioethics, it pulls on the ideas of looking at yourself, your own ideas, so it's that theory of person, who am I, what do I think, how do my ideas relate to what other people think, so that's relating to yourself first, relating to others, and then relating to the environment or to the context that you're dealing with. So there's multiple dimensions of that theory of personal development there. And I've been wondering, what is it that we need to pull together in order to make people more aware, more conscious of bioethical issues? And so I've been working with students in secondary schools, working with teachers in training to look at this issue. And I'm going to talk today from the knowledge development point of view, which several others have already mentioned. So what we're faced with is now the notion, and this is not new, that science is not just a body of knowledge that we deal with on a pragmatic level. It's relational. It's related to the societies in which that science exists and is applied. Also, if we look at learning, more modern theories of learning, particularly complex models of learning, are looking not as a toolbox, a set of kit techniques, skills that you can pick up and run with. But it's more related, again, to this relational aspect. How do we relate to ourselves as learners? How do we relate to others as learners? How do we incorporate those ideas into the way in which we learn? So this has huge challenges, especially if you're in a situation where you've got large classes, that I'll come back to later. So science is more complicated than just a body of knowledge. It's related to the society in which it's embedded, and learning is complex. Now, this is all in the socio-cultural influence context in which we're hearing many stories about, and no doubt we'll hear more about later this afternoon. All right. So in terms of bioethics education, we know that it will be influenced by the personal, social and emotional dimensions, the values and conventions of that society in which it's being dealt with, and we must acknowledge that. We know that science curriculums particularly are not values-free, and I'm a strong advocate for science education that allows for there not being an answer. Now, that may be problematic for some cultures as well, because, or for some teachers, even in New Zealand, because they feel they have to know the answer, but in fact there may not be an answer. Values are promoted by as much by what is omitted as by what's included. So you may like to ponder on that. What we choose to put in our programs of education determines what we value. All right. How do we develop knowledge then? One of the reasons I've come up with this theme today is that with the year 13 students, that's the final year high school students that I was working with in a high school in New Zealand, one of the things that was commonly said to me about all of the multiple interactive activities we were doing and the continuum type activities and a lot of the things that are shown in the textbook that Darryl has put together was, well, we didn't actually know enough to be able to make a decision. Or they would say, how can we assess someone else's opinions when we don't know we didn't have enough background information? So they needed to know more. They didn't know enough about the science or the technology content to be able to make decisions. They were also not that great at looking at themselves. They weren't very great on using self-reflective processes, so we tried to build some of those things in, and people who've read some of my previous papers will know I've been using a lot of metacognitive prompts and self-questioning procedures to help with that. And although there was a lot of group and peer discussions around how to analyse issues, as in detecting bias, looking at where do these ideas come from, whose ideas are they, who is promoting that, it was still very difficult for these students to detect bias and decide whether it was bias or not. So that's a values analysis type approach. What we don't do well either is look at knowledge in its broader political sense. I don't mean, what political party thinks this, or what our Green Party, for example, doesn't want to have any GM research done in New Zealand. However, but apart from that, I mean the bigger political issues and agendas that exist. So in terms of teaching, then I'm now going to move into what is it we need to do then to get around some of these things. How can we solve, or how can we visualise what it is we need to do as educators to pull together the scientific, technological and personal, emotive, social and ethical issues all at once, at the same time? How can we do that? Firstly, we need to figure out what people think already. So that's accessing existing knowledge. And in my formal paper that I've already sent to Daryl, I talk about the different activities that were used for that in a unit of work with these Year 13 students. So things like brainstorming, categorising, small discussions, pre-tests, surveys, pre-write paragraphs and essays, use of cue cards. All of those were designed to figure out what the students knew already. Then you need to build on that. So if you don't ask people what they know already, how can you build on it? You can tell them stuff, but they may not take it in because they don't relate it to what they know already. So this is a very constructivist approach. You build on existing knowledge by finding out what they know already, then extending it, adding on. And in this case, it was done through a very student-centred inquiry approach, again prompted by lots of questions by the teacher. I was not the teacher, I was just researching in this class. But he also instigated prompt cues on bookmarks and various things and got students to journal write or do all sorts of things like that, which was back to that whole personalising, relating to yourself. What do I think? Then what do others think, etc. So students question what they need to know and therefore what they should do to find out. Now, I was very privileged to work with 2 groups of Bangladesh teacher educators a couple of years ago, and they said to me, but Lindsay, we can't do this in a class of 60 or 120. You know, you can't expect us to get them to talk in small groups and talk to each other. I'm going, yes, I do. And get them to, so we looked at how you could do peer share questioning activities in a class of 60 or a class of 120. How can you get students to talk to each other for 2 minutes? You know, that was the challenge. So you can do it. And there are ways of getting students to be involved so much that they want to find out more, that they want to question what it is I need to know, what do I need to find out, and in the critical sense it's looking at those factors, the social factors and other emotional, political factors that influence those opinions. One of the things I had assumed about these final year high school students was that they could, they knew how to be critical. Some of them didn't. Some of them didn't know what that really meant in terms of the social political sense. So we make huge assumptions about learners that perhaps we shouldn't. And therefore, if they're not skilled, if they don't have those skills of self-questioning, how do you develop that as an educator? What is it you need to do to help people ask questions? Ask them questions. So you need to, as an educator, ask lots and model ways of asking questions. And again, this was done through lots of oral and written questions, prompts, checklists, statements of purpose and things like that. For educators, it's very hard to take a stance and say what it is you think because of the risk of indoctrination. And it's been well written about in the science education literature around educators not being willing to give their own opinion because of the fear that their students may think that is the one right way. Now, when Derek Hodson has talked a lot about this, and so has Aikenhead, that we need to move away from that. We need to say what we think, but then couch it in the terms that, well, this is what I think, this is not what everyone else thinks, there are other worldviews. Okay, so there are lots of other ways of extending knowledge. Discussions are one of them. Using case studies, again, you'll see examples in Daryl's textbook, scenarios associated with decision making, getting students to take on roles, but then de-rolling at the end is very crucial. Model building, continuums, where you get students to physically put themselves on a line to make a decision, and, as I said before, paired comparisons with questions, so getting people to talk to each other. Oh, whoops, that was the examples of the prompts. Never mind. My last thing I want to talk about is the assessing, and I have written about this, so Darryl alluded to this earlier, that there are very few studies that look at what is it we really need to be assessing, because in my opinion, it's what's assessed that actually drives what is done in education, what people think is important. And I'm reluctant to say that, but it's true, that because it's assessed, then it's valued, right? So if we think of that in terms of knowledge, what knowledge is needed, then because bioethical issues are dilemmas, they're full of controversy and multiplicities, that there is no right answer, then there cannot be necessarily a right answer if you're taking it from a personal perspective, and that there will be multiple personal perspectives. Right. So instead, maybe we should be trying to assess that decisions about scientific and technological development are taken in the pursuit of particular interests, and looking for evidence of where students have demonstrated that link. That benefits accruing to some may be at the expense of others, and that scientific and technological developments are inextricably linked with the distribution of wealth and power. So I'll leave that with you, but I really wanted to emphasise that the coming together of the knowledges, the multiplicities of the science and technology with the emotional, social, political agendas, and how do we bring those together is still problematic, I think, in some ways in our education system.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Abnuk, yes, thank you. At the back, please. Please come up to the microphone.
Avi Gupta from India. In fact, your study reminds me of another study where, it seems that making people environmentally aware, simply giving them some information, doesn't make them environmentally literate. Do you think a similar situation applies here, where we may have ethically aware people with a lot of information content, but they're not really ethically literate?
Oh yes, in fact in this case I'd say that they didn't even have enough information. So you're right, yes. Having the information or knowing, being aware, and then using that information is a totally different dimension. So on the one hand you may know, but use and
so
action is that extra dimension that I think was mentioned earlier this morning too, that we need to move to the action as well. Yep.
Thank you. Briefly, Joffe, you have a question.
I'm Jay Rajan from India. Thank you very much for the nice presentation and your good work on bioethics teaching for high school students. And regarding the bioethics education for the high school students, I would just ask you two questions. The curriculum on bioethics for teaching high school students, should it be formal or informal? And number two, should the assessment be exam-oriented or exam non-oriented?
Okay, I'll talk about the New Zealand case because we have had a formal exam-orientated education for bioethics in New Zealand since 1994. And it was mandated as part of the senior biology curriculum since 1994. So we've had a long, 11 years of high stakes assessment linked to the teaching of bioethics. And that's important because without that, I don't think we would have moved as far forward as we have done. Now, I'll give you an example of how high stakes this is. In their final year high school exam, the essay that the students had to write was worth 20% of the exam. Now, that's high stakes when you're thinking of, in terms of the amount of content, the amount of how we assess it, just the skills in essay writing alone. But apart from that, yeah, it's pretty high stakes. I think it should be high stakes myself because of this link between what is assessed tends to be what's valued. Okay? So until you've got it into your assessment and until it has that high stakes status, it tends not to, except by advocates or people who are very committed. So, you know, this is a national curriculum. All teachers need to be addressing this because it's worth such high marks. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're going to have to hold the questions, and thank you very much, Lindsay. Thank you. Also, by the way, I have just remembered we have certificates for every speaker, so please come and get them if you've already spoken later on. The next talk is by Senfor. I'm just finding the title. It's on teaching moral values for high school students in an Indian context. Okay, thank you.
Vanakkam and good afternoon for all. I am Senthil Kuran from India. I wish to present a paper on teaching moral values for high school students with special reference to Indian context. In this abstract, I deal the things of which I explain in the brief. I sort out it here and the reasons are in here. Yes. For the high school students, to the recent scenario, the moral values are needed. Moral values are respecting others' freedom. The respecting others' freedom means, contains people who are living in the world are equal. But we are not thought like that. If a person tries to dominates over others, will be an undesirable action. And the teacher kindles the hearts of the students to pay respect to the freedom of others. The teacher can improve the attitude of the students to respect the freedom of others by narrating true life incidents of eminent leaders who fought for the rights and freedom of others. The other moral values is respecting the feeling of others. The sense of feeling and sharing of feelings with others in a good way distinguishes the human beings from other living beings. Human feelings are various kinds. The sense of hunger, sleep, love, desire, anger and joy are common to all human beings. One must know the importance and the value given to one's feelings as it is given to the feelings of others. The sense of kindness shown to a man, understanding and responding others' feelings in a good way are the noblest human feelings. Understanding and responding others' feelings in a poor way cause confusion in family, cut the friendship and create ill feeling in the society. Socio-cultural restrictions. Every society has its own tradition and culture. The tradition and culture of the society are kept intact by means of moral values and social cultural restrictions. A society which follows the social rules and restrictions in the best manner will become an ideal society among the other societies in the world. The moral values and rules followed by the society have been formed to help the people to live in peace with the society boundaries. Patriotism and national awareness. Nowadays, violence, terrorism, rationalism, communalism, corruption are the major problems which have made inroads to the boundaries of the Indian nation. The students must be aware of these problems. The teachers should discuss with the students the reasons, solutions and methods of tackling the above said problems. Next. Reservation system in India. These things is a very problematic system in India. The reservation system followed in education and employment by Indian government was formed to promote and equalize the economical inequities and improve the lifestyle of all peoples of independent India. This reservation system is formed on the basis of the economical background of the people in India at the period of independence. But the people do not understand properly the advantages of the reservation system. They think that it is formed on the basis of the caste system. But it is not on this type. It is formed on the economical basis. After 57 years of independence, the reservation system is not able to achieve its goal. The people commit malpractice to get government's concessions. The competition of wealthy persons with the poor for government concession makes these systems inefficient. The selfish politicians take this attitude of the people for increasing their wealth as they are given a lot of free concession. The people also support the politicians who are able to own a lot of free concession. The teacher can explain to the students the basis and ultimate goal of reservation system and must discuss with the students the reconstruction of the old reservation system on the basis of today's crisis. The teacher should motivate the student who are only eligible to apply for government free concessions. By such a step, the next generation could be prompted to have a loyalty and mentality to help the government to achieve its goals. Reasons for curtailing unwanted desires. The students are deluded to believe that their parents and teachers always curtail their desires. But the reasons for curtailing their desires are not explained to the students, nor they are not interested to know them. If all the desires of the students are fulfilled, it will make the students stiff-necked persons. An unworthy desire is a dangerous one. Hence a Tamil proverb says, greediness brings great loss. If a student has all his desires from the childhood days fulfilled, it will make him feeling egoistic and supreme. I am the best, all must happen as I desire. Because of the supremacy theory, the overall well known, the Second World War is, if a student has such mentality and possesses great desire, ego and stiff-necked, it will affect the mentality and personality development of the students and also social welfare. The teacher must explain such conditions to the students and prevent the students from facing the above said problems. The parents and the teachers curtail some desires of the students, and the teacher must also explain the socio-economical reasons for curtailing some desires of the students by the parents. Prejudice among the students. The world is full of competition and is of different kinds, but the competition sizing among the students are entirely different. The way of handling the problems by the students in school days will determine the methods of handling problems by the students in future. So the students come forward to solve the problems that arise among them with open heart and sacrificing attitude. The class people leader misuses his small powers to give punishment to his classmate who has difference of opinions with him with the help of the class teacher. It implies the attitude of misusing powers by the students. If a student has tried to stop good opportunity which come to students talented than in education. Sports and other to attract girls, the boys are indulging in some unnecessary activities like teasing other boys and involving meaningless arguments. He will try to behave himself as a hero among the other boys. This will cause enmity among the students. Impact of mass media technology. The development of mass media technology with the help of the science and technology is gaining rapid momentum. Hence the 21st century is called the century of mass media technology. The cinema and the internet are the two branches of mass media technology which by lot of impact on the students. Cinema. Nowadays films that have plenty of violence, vigorous and sexual scenes are mostly released. A scene of evil is forced upon the people's mind through these type of films. Because of this, the people, particularly students, favor these type of films indirectly. It spoils this culture, social culture. Lot of harmful impact is cast upon the students by such films. Internet. The people use internet for many good purpose. Any information from any part of the world can be easily gathered through internet. Some people are used this special feature unfairly to earn money. Lot of bad and unfair information are telecast through internet. The availability of unfair information like sexual pictures and dialogues divert the mind of the students from study. The students who are involved in these activities with the kindness of the bad friendship divert their concentration, and they not only fail in their studies but also lose their good habits and health. Hence the students fall prey to evil habits like indulging in indisciplined activities and the attitude of stealing and etc. Because of these reasons, the futures of the students has become bleak. And we have concluded the moral values must be taught to the students who are studying in high schools, because this period of age is a suitable one to imbibe moral values in the mind of the students. The teacher has vital role to teach moral values to the students, and that they also have the responsibility of shaping the students' behavior and their bright future. The students must be aware of these evils of mass media like cinema and internet. The students must not lose their self-confidence. They should only concentrate on their things that help to shape their future life and social welfare. This is not only Indian scenario of teaching values, but may be thought of on universal one according to the needs of the peoples. Sorry, it's my maiden presentation in Venini, please for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Are there any questions? They are speechless. Yes, sir. Carry on, please. Can you reach the microphone there? Thank you.
My name is Chandran. I'm from Cambodia. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. I'm very interested in the way of teach students about the moral value. But in the meantime, according to my observation, I think the teenager or the youth in the present time, they are very sensitive in terms of getting the influence from the tendency of consumerism and the mass media that you mentioned. So my question is, what are the approaches that you are conducted in providing to fulfill the student needs in order to let them see the value of moral value education? Thank you.
Introduce some fair websites and so sorry.
Okay, yeah, Jyoti, yeah, please. There's a mic behind you. But behind you is a mic over here.
Thanks for the nice question. Actually, there is a team involved in it. As far as my college is concerned, the team members, they are provided with a certain curricula that or syllabi that should be taught or that should be practiced, and we also go through the various cinemas which are in the town, and also the different websites which are in vogue. And accordingly, we just advise them, and also we give them some opportunity whenever possible, whenever and wherever possible, inside our campus to access the internet, because ours is an institution which is located in a rural setup where internet access is a bit remote to us.
Okay, yes, please.
In India, we also have this media education. In the schools, we teach them as a part of curriculum about sex education, especially, also media education. We view a film and then we lead them into discussion. What are the scenes to be taken and what is not realistic. That type of media education is given. Also, we have this Enviro Club, wherein we inculcate this environmental awareness to the students. So these are the two important practices in India.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Simple, for presentation. And now from southern rural India, we go to Manila. I'd like to ask Marianne to give a presentation on behalf of